3. Resource efficiency and pollution prevention and management. Introduction. Paragraph 1. Environmental and Social Standard 3 recognizes that economic activity and urbanization often generate pollution to air, water, and land, and consume finite resources that may threaten people, ecosystem services, and the environment at the local, regional, and global levels. The current and projected atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases threatens the welfare of current and future generations. At the same time, more efficient and effective resource use, pollution prevention, and greenhouse gas emission avoidance and mitigation technologies and practices have become more accessible and achievable. Paragraph 2. This environmental and social standard sets out the requirements to address resource efficiency and pollution prevention and management throughout the project lifecycle, consistent with good international industry practice. Objectives: to promote the sustainable use of resources, including energy, water, and raw materials, to avoid or minimize adverse impact on human health and the environment by avoiding or minimizing pollution from project activities, to avoid or minimize project-related emissions of short and long-lived climate pollutants, to avoid or minimize generation of hazardous and non-hazardous waste, to minimize and manage the risks and impacts associated with pesticide use. Scope of application. Paragraph 3. The applicability of this environmental and social standard is established during the environmental and social assessment described in Environmental and Social Standard 1. Requirements. Paragraph 4. The borrower will consider ambient conditions and apply technically and financially feasible resource efficiency and pollution prevention measures in accordance with the mitigation hierarchy. The measures will be proportionate to the risks and impacts associated with the project and consistent with good international industry practice, in the first instance, the environmental, health, and safety guidelines. Resource efficiency. Paragraph 5. The borrower will implement technically and financially feasible measures for improving efficient consumption of energy, water, and raw materials, as well as other resources. Such measures will integrate the principles of cleaner production into product design and production processes to conserve raw materials, energy, and water, as well as other resources. Where benchmarking data are available, the borrower will make a comparison to establish the relevant level of efficiency. A. Energy use. Paragraph 6. The efficient use of energy is an important way in which the borrower can contribute to sustainable development. When the project is a potentially significant user of energy, in addition to applying the resource efficiency requirements of this environmental and social standard, the borrower will adopt measures specified in the environmental, health, and safety guidelines to optimize energy usage to the extent technically and financially feasible. B. Water use. Paragraph 7. When the project is a potentially significant user of water or will have potentially significant impact on water quality, in addition to applying the resource efficiency requirements of this environmental and social standard, the borrower will adopt measures to the extent technically and financially feasible that avoid or minimize water usage so that the project's water use does not have significant adverse impacts on communities, other users, and the environment. These measures include, but are not limited to, the use of additional technically feasible water conservation measures within the borrower's operations, the use of alternative water supplies, water consumption offsets to maintain total demand for water resources within the available supply, and evaluation of alternative project locations. Paragraph 8. For projects with a high water demand that have potentially significant adverse impacts on communities, other users, or the environment, the following will apply. A detailed water balance will be developed, maintained, monitored, and reported periodically. Opportunities for improvement in water use efficiency will be identified and implemented. Specific water use, measured by volume of water used per unit production, will be assessed, and operations must be benchmarked to available industry standards of water use efficiency. Paragraph 9. The borrower will assess, as part of the environmental and social assessment, the potential cumulative impacts of water use upon communities, other users, and the environment, and will identify and implement appropriate mitigation measures. C. Raw material use. Paragraph 10. When the project is a potentially significant user of raw materials, in addition to applying the resource efficiency requirements of this environmental and social standard, the borrower will adopt measures specified in the environmental health and safety guidelines and other good international industry practice to support efficient use of raw materials to the extent technically and financially feasible. Pollution prevention and management. Paragraph 11. The borrower will avoid the release of pollutants or, when avoidance is not feasible, minimize and control the concentration and mass flow of their release using the performance levels and measures specified in national law or the environmental health and safety guidelines, whichever is most stringent. This applies to the release of pollutants to air, water, and land due to routine, non-routine, and accidental circumstances, and with the potential for local, regional, and transboundary impacts. Paragraph 12. Where the project involves historical pollution, the borrower will establish a process to identify the responsible party. If the historical pollution could pose a significant risk to human health or the environment, the borrower will undertake a health and safety risk assessment of the existing pollution, which may affect communities, workers, and the environment. Any remediation of the site will be appropriately undertaken in accordance with national law and good international industry practice, whichever is most stringent. Paragraph 13. To address potential adverse project impacts on human health and the environment, the borrower will consider relevant factors including, for example, A. Existing ambient conditions, B. In areas already impacted by pollution, the remaining assimilative capacity of the environment, C. Existing and future land use, D. The project's proximity to areas of importance to biodiversity, E. The potential for cumulative impacts with uncertain and/or irreversible consequences, and F. Impacts of climate change. Paragraph 14. In addition to applying resource efficiency and pollution control measures as required in this environmental and social standard, when the project has the potential to constitute a significant source of emissions in an already degraded area, the borrower will consider additional strategies and adopt measures that avoid or minimize negative effects. These strategies include, but are not limited to, evaluation of project location alternatives. A. Management of air pollution. Paragraph 15. In addition to the resource efficiency measures described above, the borrower will consider alternatives and implement technically and financially feasible and cost-effective options to avoid or minimize project-related air emissions during the design, construction, and operation of the project. Paragraph 16. As part of the environmental and social assessment of the project, the borrower will characterize and estimate sources of air pollution related to the project. This will include an estimate of gross greenhouse gas emissions resulting from the project, providing that such estimation is technically and financially feasible. Where the borrower does not have the capacity to develop the estimate of greenhouse gas emissions, the bank will provide assistance to the borrower. For projects that have diverse and small sources of emissions, for example, community-driven development projects, or where emissions are not likely to be significant, for example, projects in education and social protection, greenhouse gas estimations will not be required. B. Management of hazardous and non-hazardous wastes. Paragraph 17. The borrower will avoid the generation of hazardous and non-hazardous waste. Where waste generation cannot be avoided, the borrower will minimize the generation of waste and reuse, recycle, and recover waste in a manner that is safe for human health and the environment. Where waste cannot be reused, recycled, or recovered, the borrower will treat, destroy, or dispose of it in an environmentally sound and safe manner that includes the appropriate control of emissions and residues resulting from the handling and processing of the waste material. Paragraph 18. If the generated waste is considered hazardous, the borrower will comply with existing requirements for management, including storage, transportation, and disposal of hazardous wastes, including national legislation and applicable international conventions, including those relating to transboundary movement. Where such requirements are absent, the borrower will adopt good international industry practice alternatives for its environmentally sound and safe management and disposal. When hazardous waste management is conducted by third parties, the borrower will use contractors that are reputable and legitimate enterprises licensed by the relevant government regulatory agencies, and with respect to transportation and disposal, obtain chain of custody documentation to the final destination. The borrower will ascertain whether licensed disposal sites are being operated to acceptable standards, and where they are, the borrower will use these sites. Where licensed sites are not being operated to acceptable standards, the borrower will minimize waste sent to such sites and consider alternative disposal options, including the possibility of developing its own recovery or disposal facilities at the project site or elsewhere. C. Management of chemicals and hazardous materials. Paragraph 19. The borrower will avoid the manufacture, trade, and use of chemicals and hazardous materials subject to the international bans, restrictions, or phase-outs unless for unacceptable purpose as defined by the conventions or protocols, or if an exemption has been obtained by the borrower consistent with borrower government commitments under the applicable international agreements. Paragraph 20. The borrower will minimize and control the release and use of hazardous materials. The production, transportation, handling, storage, and use of hazardous materials for project activities will be assessed through the environmental and social assessment. The borrower will consider less hazardous substitutes where hazardous materials are intended to be used in manufacturing processes or other operations. D. Management of pesticides. Paragraph 21. Where products involve recourse to pest management measures, the borrower will give preference to integrated pest management or integrated vector management approaches using combined or multiple tactics. Paragraph 22. In the procurement of any pesticide, the borrower will assess the nature and degree of associated risks, taking into account the proposed use and the intended users. The borrower will not use any pesticides or pesticide products or formulations unless such use is in compliance with the environmental health and safety guidelines. In addition, the borrower will also not use any pesticide products that contain active ingredients that are restricted under applicable international conventions or their protocols, or that are listed in or meeting the criteria of their annexes, unless for unacceptable purpose as defined by such conventions, their protocols, or annexes, or if an exemption has been obtained by the borrower under such conventions, their protocol or annexes consistent with borrower commitments under these and other applicable international agreements. The borrower will also not use any formulated pesticide products that meet the criteria of carcinogenicity, mutagenicity, or reproductive toxicity as set forth by relevant international agencies. For any other pesticide product that poses other potentially serious risk to human health or the environment and that are identified in internationally recognized classification and labeling systems, the borrower will not use pesticide formulations of products if A. The country lacks restrictions on their distribution, management, and use, or B. They are likely to be used by or be accessible to lay personnel, farmers, or others without training, equipment, and facilities to handle and store and apply these products properly. Paragraph 23. The following additional criteria apply to the selection and use of such pesticides. A. They will have negligible adverse human health effects. B. They will be shown to be effective against the target species. And C. They will have minimal effect on non-target species and the natural environment. The methods, timing, and frequency of pesticide application are aimed to minimize damage to natural enemies. Pesticides used in public health programs will be demonstrated to be safe for inhabitants and domestic animals in the treated areas, as well as for personnel applying them. D. Their use will take into account the need to prevent the development of resistance in pests, and E. Where registration is required, all pesticides will be registered or otherwise authorized for use on the crops and livestock, or for the use patterns for which they are intended under the project. Paragraph 24. The borrower will ensure that all pesticides used will be manufactured, formulated, packaged, labeled, handled, stored, disposed of, and applied according to relevant international standards and codes of conduct, as well as the environmental, health, and safety guidelines. Paragraph 25. For any project involving significant pest management issues, or any project contemplating activities that may lead to significant pest and pesticide management issues, the borrower will prepare a pest management plan. A pest management plan will also be prepared when proposed financing of pest control products represents a large component of the project.